This month marks 80 years since the atomic bombs were dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima at the end of World War II, and it's really worth thinking about what this image of the mushroom cloud has meant over time. You may think that you know what it means, but actually your understanding is probably dependent on your age, your nationality, and to an extent also your ethnicity. It may surprise many younger viewers to realise that the symbol of the nuclear mushroom cloud was a very powerful one within the pro-atomic movement. There was an idea of atoms for peace. Famously, in the aftermath of World War II, President Truman argued strongly that the dropping of the bombs had been a necessity, that it had saved millions of lives. And for an awful lot of veterans, that's how they saw it and how they have continued to see it in the decades since. The image of the mushroom cloud is a symbol of peace, of their own survival. And in fact, in 1991, President George Bush used the fact that he had been fighting in the Pacific to argue why he as president would not be apologising to Japan on America's behalf for the fact that those bombs had dropped and the subsequent loss of life. In fact, as late as 1994, there was a plan by the US Post Office to use an image of a mushroom cloud on a commemorative stamp, arguing that the bombs had caused the end of the war. That stamp was never issued. It was recalled following outcry from Japan and intervention by President Clinton, but there were multiple protest stamps then made afterwards by private individuals who were upset that that image of the mushroom cloud had been taken away from them. Unsurprisingly, the Japanese do not see things in the same way. For them, the dropping of the bombs was never justified. It could not be justified. It's utterly inhumane, and they are in fact horrified at the proportion of the American public that is still seeing it as a necessity. The argument of many parts of the Japanese media and political establishment has actually become one of racial prejudice, that the bombs were dropped in Japan and not in Germany, in part because Asian lives were seen as less valuable than European ones. And the Japanese attitude of the bombs as unforgivable, horrifying and utterly inhumane is the one that we are probably most familiar with through the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament and various anti-war films produced during the Cold War, Dr. Strangelove being one of the most famous. Alongside these two competing views of atomic weapons as bringers of both peace and destruction, there was a third approach, which was that the atomic weapons were a wonderful new aspect of science and something that was very much an aspect of American national pride. You get this very fascinating phenomenon of nuclear tourism in the southern parts of the state where nuclear testing was going on, in which people were encouraged to come and view bombs going off as part of an experience. You could have your dinner, then go outside afterwards to see a mushroom cloud in the distance. And there's some quite famous imagery around the beauty pageants that were being done at this time, where pageant queens used imagery of nuclear bombs as part of their costumes. And that's the idea of the Miss Atomic Bomb as this combination of American culture, beauty, science, ingenuity, and pride. There are other aspects where this appears as well in terms of American nuclear towns, where entire communities grew up around the nuclear industry. For example, Richmond High School has the symbol of a mushroom cloud within its school logo. And for them, it's got nothing to do with the bomb itself, nothing to do with destruction or war. It's purely a symbol that has to do with local pride and local history. So you can see that even during the Cold War, when the threat of nuclear destruction was at its height, there was no single agreement on what this image meant. And as the threat of nuclear war receded through the late 80s and 90s, it began to change again and become something that was almost purely aesthetic. It was the background in cartoons to domestic disputes, banal, everyday activities. For much of my lifetime, actually, it's appeared in films simply as a visually interesting background against which action heroes can be doing their thing. And even today, you can very easily go online and find multiple art prints of atomic explosions to hang on your wall. In the last decade, things have changed again. There has been an increased perceived threat of nuclear war as a result of North Korea's successful testing of a nuclear weapon in 2016 and the various comments that Putin has made over the course of the Ukraine war. The Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament is again using the image on their propaganda material. New versions of that have been made. And the image has also been co-opted by various other interest groups in order to symbolise the mass destruction that could come about as a result of, say, climate change or Donald Trump. The mushroom cloud has the capacity to engender hugely powerful feelings in many people. But if you are going to use it, you need to understand this history, because if you don't, you might think that the symbol that you're using is simple. It isn't. To a different pair of eyes, it might mean something completely different to what you think it means.